Okay, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to call this work session to order now that we've got all of our papers in front of us. Today we are noticed from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. This is a work session on, we get a twofer today. So one is an overview of how the city budget works and an opportunity to really look at that, look back at some existing budget documents and unpack what's going on there, ask some questions before we formally move into our budget process. And then the second piece will be a preliminary discussion of thinking ahead to our FY2026, so next year's budget priorities from the assembly. So we'll look back at kind of what's been done in the past and then just have an open discussion. So the first part, though, I will turn it over to our budget experts, and then we'll have a presentation there. So before we do that, we will do introductions. We'll go around the room, starting with Mr. Martinez.
George Martinez.
Aaron Baldwin Day.
Jared Kirker. Keith McCormick.
Yarrow Silvers.
Daniel Voland.
Anna Brawley.
Felix Rivera.
And on the phone, we have Mr. Johnson.
I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, any other members on the phone? I don't see any. Okay, and we are also joined in the room. Our presenters can introduce themselves in a second. We are joined by Clerk's Office, Legislative Services, our intern on his last day, Martin, and members of the administration and some members of the public. I will also give a shout out to the students in the back, or a student and some friends who are listening in for a class and getting a good introduction to our budget. So with that, I will turn it, sorry. Oh, yeah. I will turn it to our budget analyst, Mr. Farina, and then our OMB director, Ms. Browse. Go ahead. And if you could also remind us which of the stack of papers we should look at. Thank you.
Yes, so I'm Matthew Farina, the Assembly's budget program and budget analyst. I made a quick agenda for us. So we're gonna start, let's do a quick introduction, budget basics, and then we'll go through terminology, some code review, and that is all in your blue packet. And then I will turn it over to OMB director, and she's gonna go through some more big picture items. And then after that, we'll go move on to the budget priorities. All right, so yeah, we don't have many defined things in our code for budget, but the two big ones are appropriations, which is essentially a unit of funding that the assembly provides a department to spend, and categories, which are what you will see called commitment items or expense classes. Those are the two normal ones. And essentially what this means is the assembly gives departments authority to spend. So if you look at an appropriation as an authority to spend money, that's basically what the definition means. And so we're gonna go through a little code review. We're gonna stick to the charter first and then look at code, but code is repeats a lot of the charter. So there's not a large section there. When it comes to education, there is limited action the assembly can take on the school board's budget. It's in section 605 of the charter. Essentially, the assembly can increase or decrease the budget in total, and that is it. The budget is presented to the school board by the superintendent. They have a public hearing, and then if the assembly does change anything, they will have another public hearing, at least one. And they must do that before 90 days before the end of the fiscal year, which is different than our fiscal year. They work on the state's fiscal year of July through June 30th, July 1, June 30th. And so Article 13, Roman numerals counting, is the main area where all the laws are that affect the assembly and finances. So our fiscal year, unlike the school boards, is January 1st to December 31st, which is the same as the calendar year. Some procedural things, the budget is submitted 90 days before the end of the fiscal year. We have to have 2 public hearings, one at least 21 days after the budget is submitted, and then another one not less than 14 days before the budget's approved, which is wordy, but basically you have to wait a couple weeks for everyone to read it, and you have to have one right before you approve it. And on the annual budget, the assembly can increase, decrease, remove, or add items, and I will get 2 examples on that as well. Any questions on the timing of these ones? It's not quite the meat yet. And then one thing that often gets overlooked when going through code is charter commission commentary, because it is legally binding and important. And in our cases, there is a comment on reduction and transfer of appropriations. It uses the definitions that I showed earlier of categories and appropriations. And essentially what this section says is the assembly can appropriate all the way down to a single expense. And what is most commonly seen is when we use project codes for something. So like the new cameras at the assembly chambers have a project code. And so any money appropriated to that project code cannot be spent on anything else without the assembly's approval. But they can also do it broadly to an entire department, such as, I guess, the assembly. Our budget, so I'm with the clerk and we are under the assembly, so you can give one large lump sum to the entire assembly department, and then the budget officer for the department with OMB allocates it out to each cost center, which is like the clerk's office or the ombudsman or LSO. Those are the cost centers. Okay. And so getting into this is the section that the charter commentary is asking about or referencing. And so what it says is anytime that there may be a shortfall of revenue, the assembly can reduce appropriations not up to the unencumbered amount. And by that means any contracts we've entered would encumber funds, and any money we've already spent cannot be reduced more than that amount. And I hit a button. And the second part of this is related to above. So if the assembly provides a lump sum appropriation to an executive branch department, such as the mayor's office, the mayor has the authority to move that money between categories. And by that means like between labor, non-labor, travel, and that type of thing, or to a project code if they want to be more tight in control of their money. And the same thing goes for the assembly, but the assembly can move it between appropriations. So between the mayor's office and the finance office or anything. Questions? Okay. And then the school board also has the same authority within the school board's budget. So they can move money between categories as well.
Member Baldwin Day.
So would you help me understand the relationship between, I feel like we're using appropriations and department sort of interchangeably. So I'm trying to understand what is the relationship between appropriations, departments, cost centers, projects, categories, and like, I mean, you're throwing around all of these words, and some of them sound like you might be talking about the same thing. Some of them sound like you're talking about different things, and I would like to understand what is what.
Yes.
Is there a hierarchy?
Through the chair, I had a hierarchy in here and I took it out because I figured it was just too weedy. And now I should have not done that. Basically, if we want to get away from the same words, you can look at appropriations as their budget. So if they have appropriations, they have a budget. The department receives a budget. And within that budget, there are expense categories, which would be labor, non-labor, travel, debt service, stuff like that. And so the mayor can move budget between categories for executive branch departments, as long as the assembly did not specifically provide budget to a code like a project. And
Through the chair to Member Baldwin Day, what that becomes in real life is, we look at our budgets as labor and non-labor, right? Those are the two large categories. And labor is personnel, and that is the actual cost of the people who work in the department. Non-labor is any supplies, contractual, professional services, so anything that is not direct personnel labor. And what Mr. Freena is talking about is that through executive approval of the CFO and the municipal manager, departments can move funding between labor and non-labor as elected if it's available to do so and has not been specifically designated for a cost in either category. So when we have vacancies and the labor costs are lower than what is budgeted, sometimes departments move their labor cost funding into non-labor to buy equipment that the departments need, or sort of shore up professional services that they may need. And so over the last few years in particular, where there's been higher vacancies than usual, there has been a fair amount of moving labor into non-labor categories for spend that has actually specifically helped update equipment that departments have not been able to update over time. So there's been a little bit of a improvement on the non-labor side, but we're getting back into the territory where the vacancies are filled, and that is really no longer as much of an option as it has been.
Gotcha. Okay. So categories exist inside of appropriations. The mayor can move things within categories, but not appropriations. The assembly can move things between appropriations. I'm clear. Thank you. Very helpful.
And then in general, appropriations are only good for 1 year unless they're for capital projects or a grant from the state or feds require it to be ongoing. And so at the end of each fiscal year, any unencumbered amount expires and goes back to the fund it was appropriated from. And the departments are not allowed to make any expenditures without an appropriation, with a couple exemptions. And one of those is for tax refunds and other routine payments. So if there's something that happens every year, the assembly by ordinance can authorize the departments to make those expenditures without needing to include it in their budget. Sometimes it's called the continuous appropriation. So it's a cash limited thing. So as long as they have the cash in the fund, they are allowed to make those expenditures as authorized in the AO. And tax refunds is the easiest example at the end of year or at the end of tax season. If you had to do an appropriation for every single tax refund, it would be extremely cumbersome. And if there's an AO approving appropriations or contract for further appropriations and it's for capital projects, it does have to go to a vote. So most of our contracts include language that says something along the lines of payments under this contract are subject to annual appropriations, and that way we can control when payments are made and by what departments and everything. And that's part of the AM approval process and also the appropriation process.
And I have just one quick question here. Can you elaborate on this lapse of appropriation? So in January, for example, we'll have things on the agenda that essentially seems to be re-upping money. Can you talk about kind of how that works and how it relates to this lapse? So say something move into a project fund or something where it continues in the next year.
Yes, one thing you will commonly see near the end of the year is moving general fund dollars, so appropriations from the general fund to a department, into what we call the general project fund. And that is, the general project fund is Fund 1900. It does not expire at the end of the year, so the money stays there. And so each year, say we're doing the video chamber project, it went over the fiscal year. We took the unencumbered amount at the end of last fiscal year, and we appropriated at the beginning of this fiscal year so we could spend it again for that project. And so you'll see that often, and I will defer to Ona because she is the one that writes that.
And through the chair, I will also say that the general government funds are the ones that lapse into fund balance, and the dedicated funds are actually held within themselves. So the marijuana tax, the alcohol tax, the building safety service area, those specific service area and dedicated funds, the LRSAs, they all hold their money within their accounts so that there is not a lapsing behavior where it rolls to general fund. So if you're managing a LRSA and you're collecting that funding from the community members in the LRSA, and you don't spend it in 2025, it doesn't go away. They just continue it forward for 2026 and 2027. The alcohol tax on an annual basis sometimes, but regularly, has a fund balance, and that is contained within the alcohol tax and doesn't lapse into the general government fund balance.
Yes, to be clear, the appropriation, so the authority to spend is what lapses. The fund balance remains in the fund. Okay, and then moving off the charter into code, Title 6 is the primary area where all the finance code is, but it is a lot of it repeats the charter or is more on timing things and preparation of the budget and that sort of thing. So there's not much additional that regards to actual action by the assembly on the budget. So this first one is for the annual appropriation. This is kind of repeating what we went over earlier. The assembly can appropriate as broadly as to an entire department, which allows the mayor to move money from categories, or they can go down to a single expenditure such as a project code, or in some cases last year we did it very specifically for shelter housing. We appropriated all the way down to the expense class. So it's basically as low as the assembly can go. And then the second part of that, during the fiscal year, this is, you see a lot of these, they're ARs for supplemental appropriations that's either, increase or decrease a budget. You'll hear different words, reappropriation, which is increasing one budget or decreasing one budget appropriation and increasing another budget appropriation. Generally between when you're switching the source of funds or when you're moving budget between one department to another department. And if there's over $500,000, either increase or decrease, there needs to be a public hearing, and that's not net. So you can't go down 500,000 and up $500,000 and call it zero. It's increase or decrease 500 or more. Questions?
I'll just briefly throw in another note too, just, as you look, you might wonder, why are some resolutions requiring public hearings involving money? Often it's that reason. And it just means the timeline is longer. And I think just in general, I'll offer that, these are really the rules and the mechanisms that we have. And so as you think about things you want to fund, things you don't want to fund, right? Like any of these kind of policy decisions, these are the kind of mechanics that you need to at least be generally aware of. And these folks can help you for sure. So go ahead.
And one thing I want to say about the president, I know there's a lot of words and I'm talking quickly. The main thing I wanted with this presentation that has been emailed out to you or will be, is if you're curious, this is a good document to go back and quickly find a summary of what the section does and the number. So if you want to look deeper into the actual text, this is where it is. All right. And so I want to move on to an example. So this green document is part of the AM that comes with the annual appropriation that is presented by the mayor. And this section of it particularly is new things proposed for 2025. So you can see, if we move, can you see my mouse? No. If you look at line 41, you see the equity and justice has a reduction of $195,000, and the chief administration officer has an increase in $195,000. This is because they moved positions between the offices. So they also wanted to move the budget from where it was originally to the new location. And this is also where you'll see like one-time items that are assembly budget priorities or admin priorities. And this is also, if you're looking to make amendments, this is where they end up. Or if you're looking to reduce something, you'll also see it in this area. And when we do that, we use a form that kind of looks like this. This is just an example from, I think, 2024. So maintenance and operations needs some more snow plowing money, but we're already at the tax cap. So you have to make it neutral. And so you're reducing the appropriation from IT. So that way the total appropriation nets out to zero. So we're not impacting the tax cap at all, which is something, and we'll go over, I believe. And then the second thing, this is just an example of an AR from this year for an additional appropriation, so increasing the appropriation during the fiscal year. And this is just a simple one we did for the grant to the Federation of Community Councils. So you can see in section 1, it just says basically the who, what, why, where, when of appropriations. You say we have how much it is, we have where it's coming from, which is the general fund, who it's going to, which is the assembly, that's where the grant lives, and then also what it's for, which is an increase of the grant, and also the year. So who, what, why, where, when. And then section 2, most of our resolutions are effective immediately, but sometimes we also will delay them. So if you're doing this near the end of the fiscal year for, say, a 1,000 or a general fund to a project fund, We will make sure that it is applicable to the correct fiscal years based on the sections and the effective date. And then that is all the super technical things I have for you today. Any questions?
Yeah, any questions for members? I think people's heads are spinning a little bit, so maybe we'll move on to the next item. But hopefully this will be a good set of reference. So go ahead, Ms. Browse.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair to the committee, I will tell you that I do not have a PowerPoint. You have paper in front of you, and we'll put the paper copies up online as well for people to look at them in reference for later. But I decided that after having a conversation recently with a couple of the new members and knowing what we're looking at in terms of building the 2026 budget, I wanted to give more of a contextual overview and a historical overview to the Assembly, because one of the things that I think that we don't do enough of is look back at where we came from to know where we're trying to go and how do we get there. And I regularly see old newspaper articles or old stories that are exactly the same as the things that we are talking about right now, or very similar to the things that we're talking about right now. And it's both heartening to me, but also a little depressing, because it's nice that this is how we struggle through these things on a regular basis. But, sometimes it's hard that we've been struggling with it for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And there is a very interesting story for the municipality of Anchorage and its budget over the last 50 years. The paper that you have in front of you is not new content. This is mostly from the 2024 revised budget book. The 2025 revised budget book is being finished in formatting right now, so I didn't want to pull pieces of it and use some old, some new. So for the most part, this is content from 2024 revised for reference. And when the 2025 book comes out, we'll pass that along and we can go through any of those. The way we can start, and this actually dovetails very well with what Ms. Baldwin-Day was talking about earlier, is I pulled the glossary of terms from both the general government operating book and the capital budget book. This is not every word that's in either of those books. It is quite a few of the acronyms defined, but it's also a lot of the words that we use in the budget and our budget mechanisms, like ad valorem tax. So I think that this is at the very back of the budget books. Nobody looks at this unless you are trying to figure it out. But the budget book is a story, and it speaks in a language. And if you want to be able to understand it really well, you kind of have to understand the language. Otherwise, you're flying a little blind. So the glossary is here to force you to look at it. And if there are things in it that are of interest to you, you can dive deeper into them. You can ask any questions about any of the items that are on this list. Just to start, I think I would like to just go through and pull out a couple of things to use as a way to explain some of the things that we'll see coming up in 2026. But if anybody else is interested in diving into any of these, shout it out. Feel free to say, what's an AIM? You better know. But going through the glossary for the general government side, which is the first section of glossary terms, the front page, I think, might be relatively familiar to most of you. If there's any questions there, let me know. Let's see, second page. Anything interesting there to ask about? ATU, Anchorage Telephone Utility. Does everybody know what that was? Okay, that's a utility we sold a long time ago that started the trust fund. Page 3. The Community Assistance Program towards the bottom of the page, that is a state revenue that is distributed ideally on an annual basis from the state to communities around Alaska. Sometimes people say community assistance and revenue sharing in the same terminology. I believe those are two separate programs, one that died before the other one and one that is less than it used to be, but that's the Community Assistance Program is a state program. Balanced budget. We are required to pass a balanced budget. So we do that every year. Next
And
page. Oh, go
I'm just
ahead.
gonna jump in real quick. So, I'm hoping we can move to the other part of the discussion at about 1:40.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, so I know we have a
Sure.
lot more content than time today,
Yep.
but
Let's see. Debt service. Mhm. Anything anybody wants to ask about on these pages? No? Great. I will. Okay, on page 6, the GFOA is the Government Finance Officers Association. That is the national organization that basically grades everybody's budgets. And we regularly get, or actually we every year get an award from the GFOA for the content and presentation of our budget. But this year in particular, we got a shout out for one of our appendices and the way that it relates to the rest of the budget. So we have Appendix V, which takes the mayor's priorities and ties it into all the budget work and explains what those goals are. And that was specifically called out by their graders as something that was really interesting and sort of narrative about our budget that maybe not every budget office does. Let's see. If there is a grant program, let's see. The SAFER grant, which is listed on page 11 at the top of the page, that is a federal grant that provides revenue for firefighters. And we currently have a SAFER grant, but it expires in 2026. So that is one of the items that we will have to be aware of and fix as part of the 2026 budget build, because that funding has existed for the last 3 years and will not exist into the future, and actually funds firefighters who are on the line right now. With the loss of the SAFER grant, that's about $3 million that we have to backfill in order to maintain those positions. So you'll see some of the conversation around that. The next glossary is the capital budget glossary, which you'll notice is just all acronyms. And so it's basically just a cheat sheet to understand, like, what is ADEC or AMATS or the USGA, it's the United States Gulf Association. So why is that in there? Well, because they sponsored a project or they're going to get a project somewhere at some point. And so it's listed as part of the capital budget glossary. Any questions on terminology? Okay, these are online and at the back of your budget books if you ever need to figure something out. Also, Google. The next page we have is the tax limit calculation. So this is also the 2024 revised tax limit calculation. But I specifically wanted to include this because one of the things that even I have trouble remembering sometimes is what are the taxes under the tax cap? And I know that there are many of them, but sometimes I forget them and have to list them off on my hand in order to remember what they are. So you see at the top of the page, lines 1 through 10, those are the taxes that are included within the tax cap. So you have the real personal property taxes, auto tax, which is your regular residential automobile tax that you pay through the DMV, and it's our cut of it, the tobacco tax, the marijuana sales tax, which has now been removed and is part of the ACE fund, the motor vehicle rental tax. So that's, our local vendors for rental cars and Turo, et cetera. The fuel excise tax, which was incorporated, I believe, in 2017, 2018. And that is 10 cents a gallon on fuel. The PILT, the payment in lieu of taxes from the state and federal governments. As governments, they do not have to pay taxes the same way that we do not have to pay taxes. And so they are assessed a payment in lieu of tax. And so they pay for the property that they occupy. And MUSA and MISA, which, man, I remember when I didn't know what that meant. That is the Municipal Utility Service Assessment or the Municipal Enterprise Service Assessment. And it's basically the property tax of our utilities and enterprises because they are component units of the government. They are also not taxed, so they are assessed a a PILT, if you will, based on their net plant value. So those are all the items that make up the taxes within the tax cap. So anytime one of those grows or shrinks, ideally, they grow under the property tax line so that the auto tax, the tobacco tax, the fuel excise tax takes up a larger percentage of the bucket and property taxes are decreased. But the projections and actuals on most of those taxes stay relatively neutral over time. We've seen some of them decrease. Tobacco tax has decreased while usage has decreased. Fuel excise tax has remained relatively flat because it's a volume-based tax. But those are the major levers within the tax cap bucket. And if you want to reduce property taxes within the tax cap, you either cut the budget or you grow one of these other revenues. And then the tax cap is also calculated further down, adding judgments and settlements, and then any changes or voter approved debt service. The ones that change based on inflation and population, that is a percentage calculation that increases our tax cap. And usually the most flex on an annual basis is the change based on inflation. And you see again at the bottom of the page, it's taken out and put back in order to get to the new number at the bottom. And then the limit on all property taxes that can be collected is reflected, but then the property taxes that are actually budgeted to be collected are usually slightly less. So that is the tax cap calculation in a nutshell. It is a little convoluted, but repetition helps. Any questions? Okay.
I don't see any questions. And I know we're almost at 1:40. I think if I can ask members, we'll go till 1:45 on presentation, and then we just want to start the conversation on budget priorities, so we'll save time for that too.
So we can scoot through the next 2 pages pretty quickly. I just wanted to include the historical reference and look back for, so the first page you're looking at is the 2024 property tax per 100,000 assessed valuation based on the tax district. So you'll see the tax district numbers out to the left, and then as you travel across the page, you can see the total dollar amounts, including the ASD amounts of property taxes based on the different taxing districts within the community. There are associated maps that show you where each of these tax districts are if you're not aware of it. But this is a good way to look across the entire city on an annual basis. The next page is the property tax rate trends for the last 10 years. So it's the school district and then each of the taxing districts for the last 10 years. And it gives you a pretty clear visual into how those amounts have changed over time and where they have remained relatively flat or increased and decreased. And it's interesting if you think that this is a good way to tell a story about what's happening in the community. But it's also a way to reflect what the actual dollars are being collected in the community and then transferring into the budget. And I think most people don't see this much information all at once to reflect the history of what we've been paying in taxes. Next page is, this is the salaries and benefits assumption for 2024. Every year we put one of these out, and this is the labor cost and increases associated with each of our bargaining units. The bulk of the budget at the municipality is labor and benefits. And so these dollar amounts and these percentages are key to how much our budget grows on an annual basis. I think that's, oh, and then we're into the next one. Okay, so this is the 25-year look back on our bonds and the bonds that have been approved for the last 25 years for the road and transit, public safety, parks and rec, library and museum. We've talked this year about expanding those categories so that there's more information available. But when you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page, you can see the totals in each column. So we have $900 million in roads and transit, 125 in public safety, and 83 in everything else. So for 25 years, that is how much the voters have approved as far as those categories of bonds. The next page shows our history of legislative grants. So this is other revenue that comes into the city that this is the last 27 years. This you can see very quickly how this impacts us, because when you scroll down to the bottom of the page, which is 1997, and then scroll all the way up, you see that it used to be full in all of these lines, and now it is very empty. And the totals out on the right-hand column are, you know, they vary wildly between nothing to $250 million on an annual basis. But most specifically, it's that after 2012, all of that funding basically dried up, and the state funding in Anchorage went away. And when you consider how much money that is, and you're looking out at the total lines, you have $75 million, $85 million, $250 million, $100 million, $80 million, zero. And that is a big deal to our infrastructure, because it means that we are losing $100 million a year, disappeared, gone. And our historical bond allocations do not cover nearly as much as that ever. And our bond amounts have always existed to some degree. So this is a straight loss. The
Sorry,
next,
just one
go
brief,
ahead, yeah.
can you comment on what that 201 million was in 2022? I think I know the answer.
in 2022. Yeah, that's the Port of Alaska, as far as I know. Yeah.
So that's been the largest investment for a long time by the
Yes.
state.
Yeah. So we can skip the next page. So the next 3 pages are visuals and single pages for you to be able to see the costs across departments based on category of spend. Category, Assemblymember Baldwin Day. It says department, category, and budget all in one line. So this is just a good visual as far as if you're looking to see comparative across all of the departments for their salaries and benefits, supplies, travel, debt service, capital expenditures, and then the total appropriation. The next one, you can see all of that information broken out by revenue fund. So when you're looking at go back one page, it doesn't necessarily matter. When you're looking at this page, all of that top section are our revenues and revenue categories, and the funds out to the left, you see the area-wide fund, Anchorage Fire, ARDSA, the police, Parks and Rec, building safety. And then those are all broken down by category of expense, salary, benefits, supplies, travel, debt service, et cetera. The second page is then broken down by department. So if you want to know where the revenues are going and which department they're going to, this 2-page sheet shows you that pretty quickly. The next page is my favorite page in the budget. This is the historical budget and tax data. This is 25 years, 30 years of explicit information on the approved budget, the revised budget, the percent changes, the debt service, maximum property tax, how much we changed from the prior year, the service areas with maximum mill rates, tax on new construction, the population, right? So they're showing you what's included in the tax cap calculation, the fund balance applied. About halfway across the sheet, the fund balance column, you'll notice that fund balance is applied in almost every year. and to many varying degrees depending on what's available. That's either a nature of the budget or a nature of available fund balance. But you'll see that as we get down into 2017, 2018, the fund balance use really dries up. And that has to do with the budget at the time being very tight. We were losing on inflation in terms of the rolling average. And then we went through a very challenging time through the pandemic. And now out on the other side where we're waiting for fund balance information. So the use of fund balance is limited to service areas and any available funds that where we are aware of what the fund balance is. So this sheet is a pretty good reflection of what our budget has looked like over the last 30 years in aggregate. And sort of digesting this sheet gives you a lot of context for where we are as a community. If you take this 25 years, pair it with the legislative grants page, with the bonds page, and with the budget by department, you can see that, 2012 was a banner year. We had $250 million from legislative grants. We had $22 million from state community assistance. So we had $275 million coming in from the state, and our budget was $450 million. And that is a really intense difference to how much funding we are getting in at this point in time, and is a direct correlation to our infrastructure needs. So that's the historical context that you get to work from for the next 2 months. Yay, 3 months. Any questions?
Yeah, questions from members? Again, I know this is a lot of information.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not seeing any immediately. And I know, again, a lot to digest, but I think Matthew and Ona's doors are both open if you have questions, especially if you just want to understand the mechanics before we get into the actual meat of what the budget will be. So thank you so much for preparing this. And I'm sure folks will go back and look at this when they are not so overwhelmed by all these numbers on a page. And I know we only have about 10 minutes or so, because I want to keep us on time. We have another work session at 2:10. But I just wanted to start the conversation. So I'm going to turn us to the last two pieces of paper that we have, which were also, I think, presented or available at the Budget and Finance Committee. And what they really are just a reference. And so I'm going to give some brief context and then really just open it up for some brainstorming and open discussion. Essentially, I don't know if this has been done every year since 1975, but in the last few years, the Assembly has formally put forward some policy guidance in the form, at least 2 years ago, in the form of a resolution to the administration before the budget publishes, to say at a very high level, here are some priorities. It doesn't mean that everybody has the exact same priorities. It doesn't mean that this addresses districts, but really, and I'll turn to our, it's AR 2023-304 resolution, where it lays out just some of the context that's out there, and it gets sort of technical, but also talks about on page 2 really some high level priorities. So you see, looking at a continuation budget, meaning starting from the premise that we're looking at last year's budget for 2024, ensuring funding for core municipal services. It calls out snow plowing, it calls out public safety, et cetera, recruitment and retention of employees. Ms. Browse mentioned vacancies. So really, and then you'll see there was an amendment here, public access to assembly meetings. So that was really the origin of what became our investment in high definition cameras, all those other improvements. So this is really, this was responding to the situation at the time, but also kind of, I wanted to offer it as a general model to think about. So not that we're copying and pasting this, but hopefully as a body, we can consider something like this to move forward, probably at the end of August at this point. And then the other one I'll just mention briefly, in 2024, the body did not pass a resolution per se, but myself and Ms. Alatel, former co-chair of Budget and Finance, wrote a letter essentially reasserting what was in that prior resolution and saying no significant changes there. So I don't want to take the letter approach. I'd rather take the resolution approach. And so with that, as you look through this, again, this was a point in time, but I think a lot of these priorities are still still perennial issues. So just wanted to open it up for folks' thoughts about priorities that you would like to highlight, or maybe something that's on here that you don't feel is germane anymore. Or just, in general, as you're starting to think about the next year, kind of what is on your mind as a priority. And then I'll also say, we did not get into specific district priorities, but certainly members should also think about and communicate what those districts are, especially I'm looking at the folks up in Eagle or one in Eagle River right now. You guys have distinct issues. You have service areas, right? Same with Girdwood. And so if there's other kind of specific community ones, those could also be addressed as well. So with that, I'll just open up the floor and see if folks want to offer any thoughts. Go ahead, Mr. Kirker.
Yeah, I'll just say, look, I think we've all talked at some point or another, at least as long as I've been on the body in the illustrious 2-3 months, is that we have a affordability problem in this town. And so I'd really like, one of the priorities I'm going to be laser focused on is property tax relief. And finding ways to decrease the cost of homeownership in this town is going to be probably priority number one for me. And I'll be hopefully looking to do that through smart, targeted, precise cuts and some other mechanisms as well. But to me, that's, I think, the number one thing that we should be looking at.
Okay, thanks. And I'm just going to take some notes. So others feel free to jump in. Thoughts? Sure. Mr. Boland.
Thank you. Well, I think I have maybe same goal, climbing a mountain from a different side, maybe. But housing, I think is going to be my number one priority. How do we catalyze affordable housing? Yeah. And I don't know if we're going to do that via cuts, but I think from an investment point of view, particularly when we get focused on the alcohol tax component, I would really like to see some investments in housing.
Okay, other thoughts? Go ahead, Mr. McCormick.
Yeah, I'd like to, it's been a major focus of mine and my illustrious 2-3 months here on this body, but mental health and psychiatric care for our community.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts? Ms. Baldwin-Day.
Yeah, likewise, really interested in diversifying the revenue that is coming into our city. Understanding that we're likely to see more of the same in terms of contributions from the state of Alaska. We're going to need to evaluate how we fund essential services and how we fund it in-house, so to speak, which I think is going to be a broader conversation, beyond just the budget, but how we think about revenue and what we are willing to pay for as citizens and how we are willing to pay for it, I think is very germane to the budget conversation, and how we do that without further burdening property owners, I think is a really important consideration. I agree with Member Gerker that we cannot expect property owners to shoulder the entirety of the burden. So we'll need to be thinking about other creative revenue streams.
Mr. Martinez.
Yes, I was going to also mention revenue streams. One of the things that I think would be helpful in the entire process, and Director Browse, you do it in your presentation by going back in history. This body approved a 4-point economic development framework. And in that framework, understanding the context of where we got to in a truthful way, I think is important. Because when I look back at the liabilities of today, and I think of some of the data you showed me across 25 years, and seeing where with almost $300 million of other people's money 20 years ago leads to today is a really interesting part of the economic picture with the budget process that I'd hope we get a little more context around especially when we see categories where they are today and how we got there. It would be just helpful in that way. Revenue is a top of my priority as well. Thank you.
Yeah, other thoughts? Mr. Johnson, Mr. Rivera, Ms. Silvers.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation there. I will just throw in for my part, public safety remains a priority. And Director Browse hinted at a looming challenge relating to the expiration of that Safer Grant program, which I think is currently paying for 6 firefighters with AFD. So the loss of that funding, I think if we want to maintain staffing levels at AFD, which still are not adequate to meet national standards even today, I think presents a significant challenge. So I'm glad that she's aware of it and thinking about it. But I was going to say look forward to that conversation, but I'm fairly nervous about how we manage this challenge. But I do think it is an important one, and that public safety needs to remain a priority. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Boland.
Thank you. Along those same lines, I think we want to continue to think about how we're going to fund and grow the integrated model, MCT and MIT. And particularly with the mobile crisis team, we've had conversations about, how do we move them out of the alcohol tax into general government, which we have done partially, but looking at revenue sources for how we can maybe move the remaining portion of the alcohol tax. And I thought something we had talked about in the past was using some of that SCMT funding that we get from the state. Do we anticipate that we're going to continue to receive that?
Through the chair to Member Voland, yes, we do anticipate that. And we project ideally that there should be an uptick in the level of reimbursements, but there is some question as to whether or not any changes at the federal level may impact that reimbursement percentage. But that is what we expect right now. Going to the 24/7 model should increase our reimbursement percentage.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Palmady, go ahead.
One additional thing I would like to mention as we're thinking about some of these bigger picture goals, housing affordability, housing supply. I think we need to keep in mind that it takes people. It takes people to do some of that behind the scenes work to process permits, to do long range planning, to make that machinery run. And I think that's a consideration alongside, right, is how do we adequately staff the departments that we expect to be high performing, and what parameters do we put in place to ask that those services be efficient. I think that's something else I'm particularly interested in, is how are we adequately funding development services, and what do we then expect from those departments?
Thanks. And I'll just note, we are at 2. We'll take a couple more minutes here. I know we have a lot of folks for our next work session, which starts at 2:10. So we're wrapping up, and then we'll get to you guys soon. So go ahead, Mr. Martinez.
I just wanted to also reiterate the focus on behavioral and mental health response in the community, and the youth investments, youth development continues to be a really critical area to me. The Assembly has approved a resolution saying we support removing barriers, and we just started rolling ACE funds out, but there are other probably areas of investment in the overall quality of life for young people that I want us to make sure we're capturing as best as we can in a variety of ways. Transportation is one of those areas that we recently voted on to open up access for young people. And so more ways we can figure out how to create a city that young people can access in budgets across different sections, I think is important. Thank you.
Okay, any other last comments? Not seeing any right now. I'll just add, I heard a lot that I like. I was taking good notes, and I guess one of my priorities would be, we can't fix everything in 1 year, but continuing to work toward fixing problems and thinking ahead to our future, because we know a lot of this big structural stuff will take time. So with that, we will end this work session. Thank you again to our presenters. Their doors are open if you have questions. And also, we will continue to make topics like this education opportunities at the Budget and Finance Committee. And then as we look ahead to our budget calendar, which we'll brief in August, then we'll be able to put all this new knowledge into action. So with that, we will adjourn the work session, and our next work session will start at 2:10 in the same room. Thank you, everybody.